This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, 9th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. John said to Jesus, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. Whoever is not against us is for us. For truly I tell you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you bear the name of Christ will by no means lose the reward. Now, if any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believes in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life maimed than to have two hands and to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out. It's better for you to enter the kingdom of heaven with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into hell, where their worm never dies and the fire is never quenched. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how can you season it? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. The gospel of our Lord. Please have a seat. Well, may God's grace and peace be with you all this morning. So we've heard some texts this morning already. Each of them, any one of them would be enough to talk about for some time. And then in this gospel text, so much going on. But that part about if your hand causes you to sin, or your foot or eye, cut it off, tear it out. It's a hard saying, to say the least. I think we could really say it's, well, maybe the harshest of Jesus's teaching. And although it's clear, it's said in a way that's meant to be intentionally provocative and in that exaggerated language, it's still something to ponder. I want to take a little different direction or connection to it. You know, it wasn't a common sight, but I remember as a child growing up on a farm that sometimes and would see other farmers, well, who were missing a hand or an arm. It was one of the inevitable dangers of farming and its machinery. And the same, of course, is true for so many who have served in our armed forces. And although I don't pretend to know the secret thoughts of those who have suffered such losses, there's a story called Remembering by the writer and farmer Wendell Berry that tries to tell the truth about, well, a man who has lost his hand in a farming accident. The story begins in San Francisco, where the man, Andy Catlett, is lying in the darkness of a hotel room. He's far from his home in Kentucky. He's traveled there to speak at an agricultural conference. He's both a farmer and, involved in teaching other farmers. But at this time, at this conference, as they're talking about everything being bigger and more land and promoting industrial farming, in the midst of what he's hearing, but more so in the midst of what he has experienced himself, he's in despair. He wakes from a restless sleep where his first feeling is that of the absence which lives at the end of his arm. He remembers earlier in the day getting up in the dark at his farm and going to the barn to do the feeding and milking, and then returning to the house where his wife has breakfast waiting. But they're silent and awkward with each other because they had fought the night before. He wants to tell her how slow and awkward he feels working with one hand, but he holds himself back. He's told her often enough, heaven knows, for so much of his thought now had to do with the comparison of times, as if he were forever condemned to measure the difference between his life when he was whole and his life now. And though he knows he was in the wrong, in his loss and resentment, his despair welling up inside, he says, I feel like no account to anybody. And she responds, that's not for you to decide. Have you asked me? Have you asked the children? And then he remembers the accident. He'd been helping his neighbors harvest corn. It was a brilliant fall day, ideal for work with the end in sight. But still, it was getting on in the day, and there was pressure to hurry. The corn picker had become fouled, and Andy got off his tractor to clear it, leaving it running. He began to pull the crammed stalks out of the machine, irritated by the delay. And then something happened that he thought he had imagined, but it turned out he had not imagined at all. The machine took his hand. Barry writes, he heard the long persistence of the noise of the machine, which did not know the difference between a cornstalk and a man's hand. And when the other men heard his cries and ran to him, one of them clamped his hands over Andy's eyes and told him not to look. In the operating room, and his wife patting his good hand and saying, what have you done to yourself? And in bitterness and shame, he says, I've ruined my hand. And now in the darkness of a distant room, alone, and remembering silence, he despairs. His right hand had been the one which he reached out to the world and attached himself to it. When he lost his hand, he lost his hold. He remembered with longing the time of his body's wholeness, grieving over them, how his body once dressed itself while he thought of something else. He remembered reaching out two-handed to his wife and holding her. And now the hand that joined him to her had been cast away. And as he remembers, he also remembers old friends and neighbors now missing, dead. It was as though absence was what he now knew best, the connections his life once had. He'd learned to use the mechanical hook that he wore. He had a left hand and what he called something less good than a left hand now. He had made it through the first winter with the help of his wife and the kids, but all were apprehensive of his anger, giving him a patience and kindness he knew he did not repay. One day, after being especially hard on his son in anger over his need for help, his wife said, Andy, I'm sorry for what happened. I can't tell you how sorry, but you must learn something from it. And when he asked, learned what? She said, I don't know. You must accept this as given to you to learn from, or it will hurt you worse than it already has. You need forgiveness. And I want to give it to you. All of us do. And you need more than ours. You must forgive yourself. And then he remembers back to a night after his grandmother's death, when he was sorting through her belongings and found an old bill in a drawer that showed that after selling their crop, they still owed money for seed. And in some moment of desperation, his grandmother had written on the back of the note, "Oh Lord, what's to become of us?" And then beneath, as though to correct what she had written, she added, "Out of the depths I cry unto thee, O Lord." The words came to him now in his own despair, and as he looked at the ruined stump of his hand, he remembered all those who had come before him, the hard work, the good times and bad, the suffering they had known. With a few hours before his flight home, he gets up in the early morning and walks the streets of San Francisco across the hills to the bay. And on his way, he encounters what he first takes to be a bundle of rags on the sidewalk, but then he realizes is a man. And as he passes, the man speaks, "Could you spare me $1 for a little breakfast?" "I thought the toll was a dime," Andy says. And the bundle of rags responds, "This ain't 1930. And as Andy reaches for his wallet, he wonders whether to let the man see him one-handed, disarmed. But he plucks out some bills, a 5 and a 1, and gives the man both. And later, as he makes his way back, he hears a voice again, "Can you spare me $1 for a light lunch?" "Hold on now," Andy says. "Isn't this the same day it was this morning when I gave you $6? "Ah, indeed," the man says. "Go in peace, friend. You are free." And then somehow, Andy remembers where he is. He's far from home, and it's time to return. The writer tells us there was one remembering that was only grief and loss and absence. But there is another kind that connected him to those who had gone before, that connects him to his family and neighbors and all those who have suffered. This is a remembering that connects him once more to the human race and to the God who holds them all. In the unlikely guise of a ragman, he has heard a word of forgiveness pronounced, a word of forgiveness he could not give himself. Now, as you heard in today's gospel, Jesus spoke of cutting off your hand if it causes you to sin. I don't think he meant it literally. And well, the thing is, he didn't say anything about what to do if something like your hand being cut off is the cause of sin. I think words would apply here as well. You know, there are losses and griefs that we must all and will all face in life. Perhaps not the loss of a limb, but others just as dear, the death of a beloved child, the loss of a job, the end of a marriage, times when our sense of the absence of something is greater than any sense of presence. And at those times, when what we've lost may lead us into sin. I don't mean sin as something wrong we may do simply, but sin in its deepest sense, as Martin Luther understood it. Sin is the opposite of faith, sin as despair, being cut off from that which gives us life and hope and the power to carry on. Then what we need most of all is to remember, to be reconnected with our own lives, with those who have gone before us, those who have known suffering and pain and loss, with those we love. Remembering, that's the real meaning of the much maligned word religion. It comes from the Latin with the which means again, and legio. It's the same root as the word ligament in English. It means to be reconnected, to be remembered, reconnected to community with God and one another. And that, of course, is what the story of Jesus is all about, because the gospel tells the lengths to which God goes to remember us, to reclaim us, reconnect us, to bring us back into the human family, to bring us home. Though his body was broken and ruined as the revelation of God's love, Christ is the source of a forgiveness and healing that we cannot give ourselves. And who knows what guise the healer may come in, or who may speak the words of new life. It may seem to come from an unlikely source, but as Jesus told his disciples, whoever's not against us, who's ever not against me, is for me. It's the mystery of the incarnation of God revealed in flesh and blood, perhaps even in our own flesh and blood, when we witness to the deepest ties of human community and of God's love, and in memory and with hope, we bring healing and new life to those who are cut off. Amen.